Positive thinking saved no one. It only taught us how to smile while drowning. We have mistaken the mask for the face. In an age drowning in noise and suffering, we were offered a single solution, whispered in boardrooms and yoga studios, printed on refrigerator magnets and coffee mugs. Think better thoughts, and your life will become better. Believe in abundance, and abundance will arrive. Visualize success, and success will materialize. The architecture of this promise is seductive precisely because it places all power in a single location, your mind, and all responsibility on a single being, yourself. But look deeper. Beneath this glittering philosophy lies something far more troubling, a collective agreement to look away. We live in an epidemic of forced optimism. Walk through any city and you will see them, the ones with the practiced smile, the affirmation on their lips, the carefully curated narrative of their own lives. I am fine. Everything is working out. I am blessed. The words have become so familiar, so expected, that we no longer hear them. They have become the background radiation of our culture, a constant hum that numbs us to the actual sound, the sound of people breaking beneath the weight of their own pretense. This is not a failure of positive thinking. This is its perfection. For positive thinking has become the most elegant instrument of self-deception we have ever invented. It allows us to remain in our prisons while convincing ourselves we are free. It permits us to ignore the cracks in our foundation while we paint the walls a brighter shade. It teaches us that our sadness is a failure of imagination, our grief a lapse in faith, our fear an indictment of our spiritual maturity. And so we smile harder, we affirm more fervently, we think better thoughts, all the while the authentic self, the one that feels, that doubts, that knows real darkness, grows smaller and smaller until it becomes almost invisible. What we call positivity is often the refusal to see. Consider the structure of this deception. Positive thinking does not ask us to change. It does not demand transformation. It demands only that we rearrange our thoughts, as if consciousness were a filing cabinet and all our suffering merely misplaced paperwork. The beauty of this is that it costs us nothing except the truth. We can remain exactly as we are, wounded, fragmented, inauthentic, and simply think about ourselves differently. What a bargain! What a curse! The outer world shimmers with affirmation. LinkedIn feeds overflow with gratitude posts. Instagram testimonies celebrate the breakthrough. The self-help industry, a multi-billion-dollar apparatus, churns out books and seminars and podcasts, all promising that the correct thought sequence will unlock the life you deserve. And people listen. People desperately, urgently listen, because the alternative, that your thoughts alone cannot save you, that your mind is not a magic wand, that transformation requires something far more costly and demanding, this alternative is too painful to contemplate. So we do not contemplate it. We smile instead. But beneath the smile, something else is happening. There is a fracture, a deepening schism between who we appear to be and who we actually are. The practiced optimist becomes increasingly disconnected from their own inner life. Their emotions, real, raw, legitimate, are treated as obstacles to be overcome rather than messengers to be heard. Grief is rebranded as negative thinking. Anger becomes a low vibrational frequency. Doubt is evidence of insufficient faith. And the person, increasingly alienated from their own authentic experience, begins to move through the world like a sophisticated automaton, saying the right things, thinking the right thoughts, all the while spiritually anesthetized. This is the hidden danger we must name. Positive thinking, in its most insidious form, is not a path to awakening. It is a path to numbness, disguised as enlightenment. The masks we wear become so smooth that we forget we are wearing them. The silence we maintain about our inner fragmentation becomes so complete that we mistake it for peace. And the smile we have practiced for so long begins to feel like our
actual face. But a smile is not a face. A performance is not a life. And a thought, no matter how elevated, is not a transformation.
There is a law that lies beneath positive thinking, so fundamental that it has been almost forgotten. Emmet Fox understood this law. He knew that thought has power, but not in the way we imagine. We have been taught that thought is power in itself, that if we think strongly enough, insistently enough, our thoughts will bend reality to our will. This is the superstition that has embedded itself in our culture like a splinter. Think it, and it becomes. Believe it, and it manifests. Repeat it, and the universe will deliver. But this is not how thought works. This is not the law at all. The actual law is far more profound and far more demanding. Thought is creative not because human willpower is infinite, but because thought is an instrument of divine mind. Thought has power only when it is aligned with truth, only when it is a channel through which something larger than ourselves can flow. The moment we try to use thought as a tool of personal will, the moment we attempt to think things into existence through repetition and force, we have severed the connection to the source from which all authentic creativity emerges. This is the fatal mistake at the heart of positive thinking. We approach our thoughts like a person standing before a mirror, trying to change the reflection by painting over it. We do not go behind the mirror. We do not address the face itself. We simply keep adding layers of paint, more and more affirmations, more and more visualizations, hoping that eventually the painting will be thick enough to hide the truth beneath. But the mirror knows, the reflection knows. The truth of what we are continues to broadcast itself through every pore of our being, and no amount of painted affirmations will silence it. Genuine positive thinking, if we can even use that term, is not manufactured. It is not the result of repetition or force. It is the fragrance of something that has already changed at a deeper level. When a human being aligns themselves with truth, when they stop resisting reality and begin to recognize the divine mind operating through and within all things, then their thoughts naturally become different. Not because they are forcing them to be different, but because their perception has shifted. They are no longer thinking about life, they are thinking with life itself. Fox knew that you cannot heal fear by painting over it with pretty thoughts. This is not a poetic metaphor. This is a statement of absolute fact. Fear that is suppressed through affirmation does not disappear. It goes underground. It continues to operate at levels beneath conscious awareness, continuing to shape behavior, continuing to generate suffering, continuing to build the elaborate architecture of self-deception that keeps us imprisoned. Real healing requires that we face the fear, that we say yes to it, even in saying no to its power over us, that we look at it directly with unflinching honesty and recognize it for what it is, a distortion of truth, an illusion born from identifying ourselves with a small, separate self rather than with the infinite intelligence that flows through all beings. This is not the work of thinking better thoughts. This is the work of seeing through the illusion entirely. When we stop trying to use our thoughts as weapons against reality, when we stop attempting to bludgeon ourselves into positivity, then something remarkable happens. A natural peace begins to emerge, not because we have thought ourselves into peace, but because we have stopped the resistance that keeps us from peace. The positive thoughts that flow from this alignment are genuine. They are not effortful. They do not require constant maintenance and reinforcement. They simply arise naturally, like flowers blooming in spring, because the soil has become fertile. But here is what makes this threatening to our culture. This cannot be accelerated. This cannot be packaged and sold. This cannot be achieved by listening to the right podcast, or reading the right book, or attending the right seminar. This requires something that stands outside the economy of self-improvement. It requires surrender. It requires the willingness to not know.
It requires the capacity to be still with what is, rather than constantly trying to rearrange what is into what we think should be. And so we continue painting, we continue affirming, we continue thinking our better thoughts, all the while moving further and further away from the simplicity of truth that stands waiting, patient, and eternal for us to finally stop long enough to notice it.
There is a shadow in the temple of light, and it grows longer the brighter the light pretends to be. We have created a culture of good vibes only. Walk into any wellness center, any spiritual gathering, any space devoted to personal development, and you will feel it. The unspoken agreement that certain emotions are acceptable and others are not. Happiness, yes. Gratitude, absolutely. Abundance, always. But grief? No. Anger? Certainly not. Doubt? Never. These are the shadow emotions, the ones we have learned to regard as failures of the enlightened self. And so we suppress them. We manage them. We package them into acceptable narratives. We say we are working through them or releasing them, as if emotions were objects we could discard like trash. But emotions are not trash. They are information. They are the intelligence of the body communicating to us truths that the thinking mind is too defended to perceive. When we create a culture that says only certain emotions are spiritual, only certain thoughts are acceptable, we create a psychological split that is almost impossible to heal. We fracture ourselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts. We develop an internal hierarchy in which the positive self is celebrated and the negative self is exiled. And the person caught in this bifurcation becomes increasingly unreal, increasingly haunted by the parts of themselves that they cannot acknowledge. This is what is meant by spiritual bypassing. The use of spiritual ideas and practices not to transform, but to escape. We use the language of light to run from darkness. We use the promise of enlightenment as a sophisticated instrument of denial. And the shadow, denied and repressed, grows. It metastasizes. It begins to operate unconsciously, shaping our behavior, sabotaging our relationships, generating the very suffering we are trying to escape from. Consider the person who repeats, "I am fine," so many times with such conviction that they finally believe it. They have managed to convince the conscious mind, but the body knows. The body carries the tremor of all the tears they have not cried. The body holds the tension of all the anger they have not expressed. The body becomes a museum of suppressed truth, and the person walks through their life increasingly numb, increasingly disconnected from their own vitality. Or consider the spiritual teacher, we have all known one, who speaks eloquently of love and light and transcendence, who has mastered the language of enlightenment, who can move an audience to tears with their eloquence. And then, in the privacy of their life, they implode. Depression, addiction, sexual misconduct, financial fraud. We are shocked. We say, how could someone who speaks such truth live such a lie? But this is not shock. This is the inevitable result of a consciousness split so completely that it can no longer hold itself together. The brighter the light we insist upon publicly, the darker the shadow we are forced to harbor privately. To be always positive is to be half alive. No, more than that. To be always positive is to be half alive and not know it. It is to be living a life of constant dissociation, defending yourself against your own experience, maintaining an image of wholeness while being fragmented at the core. And the cost is incalculable. It is measured in depleted nervous systems, in anxiety disorders, in the epidemic of suicide among those who appear to have everything. It is measured in the loneliness of people surrounded by others but unable to connect authentically.
It is measured in the creative paralysis that comes from always having to perform, always having to present an acceptable version of yourself to the world. We have been sold a beautiful lie. We have been told that the path to heaven is paved with affirmations and visualizations and gratitude practices. But the authentic path requires something far more costly. It requires that we descend, that we face the darkness within ourselves not to overcome it, but to know it fully. That we allow ourselves to be broken open by grief, to be clarified by anger, to be humbled by doubt. This is not darkness. This is honesty. And honesty is the only gateway to authentic light.
There comes a moment, for those brave enough to live it, when the carefully constructed edifice of forced optimism simply collapses. The affirmations no longer work, the visualizations feel hollow, the smile becomes impossible to maintain. And in that moment, something extraordinary can happen if we are willing to let it. This is the moment of breaking. This is the threshold moment where we can either rebuild the same structure, slightly reinforced, or we can let everything fall and discover what lies beneath. For most, the impulse is to rebuild. We have invested so much in the image of positivity that the thought of releasing it feels like annihilation. So we go back to the books, back to the teachers, back to the affirmations. We find new frameworks, more sophisticated spiritual technologies, higher levels of consciousness to aspire toward. We make the mistake deeper. But for some, the collapse is complete enough that there is no turning back. For some, the truth becomes too obvious to deny. And in that clarity, something shifts. Emmet Fox taught that light does not deny darkness, it reveals it. This is the paradox at the heart of authentic transformation. True light does not erase shadow. It shows us the shadow for what it actually is. It illuminates the architecture of our self-deception with such clarity that we can no longer pretend we do not see it. You cannot deny the darkness into light. You can only let the light reveal it. And this is where the work of genuine spirituality begins, not in the ascension, but in the descent, not in rising above, but in diving into, not in transcending the pain, but in moving through it with full consciousness. The person who arrives at this threshold discovers something that no motivational speaker could ever tell them. The path to peace does not go around suffering, it goes through it. Consider the person who loses everything. Their business fails, their relationship ends, their health deteriorates. The scaffolding of their life that seems so solid suddenly reveals itself to be constructed of cardboard and wishful thinking. In this moment, they face a choice. They can try to stay positive, can try to think their way out of it, can try to find the spiritual meaning that will make it all make sense. But if they are wise, if they have learned what cannot be taught in seminars, they will do something different. They will allow themselves to fall. They will let the grief come without trying to reframe it as a blessing. They will feel the anger fully without needing to transform it into a lesson. They will sit in the ashes of their former life and simply be present to what is. And in that presence, something unexpected occurs. The constantly grasping, constantly achieving, constantly thinking mind finally goes quiet. The internal chatter that has been driving them toward the next accomplishment, the next acquisition, the next spiritual experience, all of it dissolves. And in the silence that emerges, there is a peculiar peace. Not the peace of having solved the problem, not the peace of having overcome the obstacle, but the peace of having finally stopped fighting. This is the peace that passes all understanding, not because it is mysterious, but because it cannot be understood by the mechanism that has been driving all the suffering. It can only be experienced. And the experience comes only when we have finally exhausted all of our strategies, all of our techniques, all of our clever methods of escape. Fire purifies gold.
It does not remove the gold or make it less gold. It simply burns away everything that is not gold. And the person who has passed through the fire of authentic crisis, the person who has allowed their false self to be completely consumed, emerges not with a better personality, but with no personality at all. Which is to say, with the capacity to be authentic in any moment, because there is no longer anyone there to be fake. Seeing clearly is the highest form of positivity. Not seeing clearly that things are working out, not seeing clearly that the universe is conspiring in your favor, but seeing clearly what is. Seeing clearly that you are not separate. Seeing clearly that the resistance to life is the only thing that generates suffering. Seeing clearly that right now, in this moment, everything is exactly as it needs to be for your awakening. This clarity is the pearl of great price.
After the collapse, after the breaking, comes the question that cannot be avoided. Now what? For there is a work to be done, not the work of positive thinking. This we have transcended, not the work of accumulating more spiritual experiences or higher states of consciousness, but the work of coming home to what you actually are, the work of aligning yourself with truth moment by moment, thought by thought, in the midst of your ordinary life. This work has 4 movements. They are not steps because they do not progress linearly. They are more like the 4 chambers of a heart, each essential, each recurring, each beating together to create the rhythm of an authentic life. The first movement is observation. This is the capacity to notice your thoughts and emotions, without immediately identifying with them, without immediately trying to fix them or escape from them. It is the simple practice of witnessing what is. When an emotion arises, let us say fear, the practice is not to affirm away the fear, not to try to think it into something else, but simply to observe it, to notice it as a phenomenon, to feel where it lives in the body, to hear what it is trying to communicate. This observation is itself transformative because it creates a space between the stimulus and your response, and in that space lies all of your freedom. The second movement is acceptance. After observing, we come to acceptance, not resignation, but acceptance. This means letting reality be exactly what it is, at least for this moment. If you are afraid, you are afraid. If you are grieving, you are grieving. If you are uncertain, you are uncertain. Acceptance does not mean you will remain in this state. It means you stop generating additional suffering by insisting that you should feel differently than you feel. It means you say yes to life exactly as it is presenting itself to you right now. The third movement is alignment. This is where we remember the law that Fox taught, that we are not separate beings trying to will our way through life, but instruments through which something vastly larger can express itself. Alignment is the practice of asking not how can I fix this, but what is the truth here? What is trying to happen through this situation? How can I become a clear channel for the divine mind to work through me? This is not passive. It is the most active stance possible because it aligns your will with something infinitely larger than your personal preferences. The fourth movement is expression. This is where you act. But your action now comes from a different place. It is not the frantic, grasping action of someone trying to escape their suffering. It is not the performance of someone trying to maintain an image. It is authentic action, born from truth, rooted in acceptance, aligned with the larger intelligence. This action might look quiet, or it might look loud. It might involve speaking up, or it might involve remaining silent, but it will be true. And in its truth lies its power. These 4 movements do not happen once. They are not a technique to master. They are a way of being that becomes increasingly natural as you practice it, as you allow it to infuse your consciousness. When you find yourself identified with a negative thought, you return to observation. When you find yourself resisting reality, you practice acceptance. When you find yourself disconnected from the larger intelligence, you practice alignment. And when you find yourself called to act, you express from truth. There is a story worth telling here. A man loses everything he has worked for his entire life. His career collapses. His savings evaporate. The meaning structure he had built his identity around crumbles. In the traditional narrative, he would now begin the work of positive thinking. He would gather himself, reframe the situation as an opportunity for growth, and begin rebuilding. And some people can do this, but this particular man cannot. He is too broken. The ground beneath him is too thoroughly destabilized. So he does something different. He allows himself to break completely. He stops trying to fix it. He stops telling himself stories about how this is a blessing in disguise. He simply sits with the despair. He lets it move through him. He cries. He rages. He is honest about his fear, his shame, his sense of complete failure. And in that honesty, something shifts. As he stops resisting the darkness, he discovers that he is not actually destroyed by it. He is still here. He is still conscious. He is still capable of feeling. The core of him, the part that was never constructed by career or money or external accomplishment, remains untouched. And from that core, a different kind of action becomes possible. Not the action of someone trying to prove their worth through achievement, but the action of someone who is finally free from needing to prove anything at all. And paradoxically, this man's life begins to move in directions he could never have anticipated, because he is no longer constrained by his need to maintain an image or control the outcome. True positivity is not a mindset. It is not something you think yourself into. It is the fragrance that naturally emerges when the resistance has been released, when the authentic self has finally been allowed to exist.
We have traveled far from where we began. We started with the proposition that positive thinking saved no one. And now, at the end of this journey, we can see more clearly what this means. The hidden danger of positive thinking isn't that it fails. That would be simple to remedy. No, the hidden danger of positive thinking is that it succeeds. It succeeds in creating a sense of progress. It succeeds in making us feel like we are working on ourselves. It succeeds, most dangerously, in keeping us asleep while convincing us that we are waking up. This is why it is so insidious. Not because it is obviously false, but because it contains just enough truth to be plausible, just enough real results to justify its continued practice. All the while, it keeps us locked in the very prison we think we are escaping from. The person who practices positive thinking for their entire life without ever questioning its fundamental premises is like someone who rearranges the furniture in their cell for 50 years, convinced that they are gradually making it more comfortable, never noticing that they are still imprisoned. But there is something that lies beyond this duality. There is a consciousness that has moved through positivity and negativity and emerged on the other side. When you align with divine mind, when you stop trying to will your way through existence and instead become a clear channel for larger intelligence, there are no positive or negative thoughts. There are only true thoughts. Thoughts that reflect reality as it actually is. Thoughts that flow from the recognition that you are not separate from the totality of existence, but an integral expression of it.
In this state of consciousness, you might face tremendous difficulty, yet you will be at peace. You might experience loss, yet you will not be diminished. You might encounter pain, yet you will not be wounded, because you are no longer identified with a small, separate self that is vulnerable to these things. You are resting in the recognition of the indestructible, eternal, completely secure nature of your true being. This is not achieved through thinking better thoughts. It is achieved through the dissolution of the identity that is always thinking. It is achieved through the profound surrender of trying. It is achieved through the recognition that the consciousness that is aware of all thoughts, positive and negative, is itself untouched by any of them. It is the space in which all thoughts arise and dissolve. It is the source from which all authentic life flows. Fox knew this. He knew that the work is not to think better, but to think less. To allow the mind to finally become still enough that the intelligence that flows through all existence can begin to use it as an instrument. Not your intelligence, not your will, not your plan, but the larger intelligence that is operating through all things, infinitely wise, infinitely compassionate, infinitely free. When you stop trying to think your way to enlightenment and instead surrender to what already is, you discover that there is nothing to achieve and nowhere to go. You are already home. You are already complete. You are already exactly what you need to be in order to serve life fully. The smile that previously was a mask becomes authentic, not because you have convinced yourself to be positive, but because your face is no longer doing anything. It is simply reflecting the peace that your mind has finally found through the cessation of its endless struggle. This is the ending of this tale, but not the ending of anything. It is rather a beginning, or more accurately, a recognition of a beginning that never actually stopped. The moment you were born, the moment before your first thought, was already complete, already perfect, already at rest. And that moment is still here. It is never actually gone anywhere. It is still available. It is still waiting. And the work, if it can even be called work, is simply to notice it.
To stop the constant doing, to release the grip of the personality that has been so busily trying to improve itself, to let the thought structures finally dissolve like sandcastles returning to the ocean from which they were never actually separate. And in that release, to discover what remains. What remains is what has always remained. What remains is truth. What remains is stillness. What remains is the presence that does not need to think any positive thoughts because it is entirely at peace. The listener who has traveled this far may feel no different than when they began. They may not be able to point to a new skill acquired or a greater achievement secured. They may not even feel a sense of spiritual progress or growth. And if they feel nothing, then perhaps they have actually understood. Perhaps they have glimpsed, for just a moment, the possibility of a consciousness that does not need to feel any particular way in order to be whole. This is the gift that lies on the other side of all positive thinking, the realization that you were never broken, that there was never anything to fix, that the seeking itself was the only thing that created the sense of lack, and that in the moment you finally stop seeking, in the moment you finally let yourself be exactly as you are, a peace descends that has no opposite, that cannot be lost, that is more real than anything positive thinking could ever promise. Let that sink in. Let that become still within you. And then let even that go